I have been with Palmetto Promise Institute since 2021. I started here as an intern and then they could not get rid of me, so I have stuck around since then. And I'm now full-time as a policy analyst. And we are one of the South Carolina partner organizations for Callan, and very excited to be here today to give you all kind of a lay of the land of what's happening in the State House. And feel free at any point if you want to jump in with questions. You can do the little raise your hand, or you can type them in the chat, or you can just unmute and chat with us. I want this to be interactive and not just me talking the whole time. So feel free to hop in. So I'm going to start things off with a little bit of, South Carolina Government 101. I don't like to assume that everybody knows how everything works, though I'm sure all of you are very brilliant and know everything, but a little review just in case. So the General Assembly, made up of the House and the Senate, operates on a 2-year session. So this January is the start of the 2-year session. And they run Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from the second Tuesday in January till about the middle of May. They can kind of set that date when they want to leave. And so they're here all day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, pretty much every week. They take a little spring break for everyone to do their little vacations. But otherwise, you can check the State House website and see their schedule. They will be here in Columbia working. And so whatever is done in the first year, whatever's not finished, the bills that are filed, you can pick those right back up in the second year. It's just kind of a second half of that session, the way Congress works too. But then if anything doesn't get passed by the end of that second year, that is where the legislation is dead, it's gone, and we have to start all over the next session with the new General Assembly. And that's because the House is elected every 2 years, the Senate is every 4 years. And then sine die is that day in May when they say, like, this is the end of the session, we're taking summer break, we're coming back in January of next year, or if it's the end of session, it's like, this is sine die for real, like, we're done. And then one thing that Bryce was chatting about before the call is a day called Crossover Day, which the House and Senate for the first time this year have eliminated Crossover Day, but it's basically if a bill originates in one chamber, it has a deadline to get it over to the other chamber. They usually put that in April sometime just so that they have time to get through everything before they leave in May. But this year, for the first time, they are getting rid of crossover day. So the House can continue to send bills to the Senate can continue to send bills to the House after that date in April. And so I think that will definitely make for an interesting session. I don't know if it'll result in more bills getting passed, because a lot of times what tends to happen is both chambers really, really, really like their own bills. And so they just keep voting on their own bills and sending them over to the other chamber. And then the other chamber is like, we're going to keep doing our own bills. We're not going to look at your bills. So we'll see. There's a little bit of beef between the two chambers. So they kind of go at it. So here is a little bit of Schoolhouse Rock for you. This is a graphic some of our communications team did a couple years ago, and I think it's kind of fun to talk about how the bill becomes a law. It's kind of complicated, so we won't go through the whole thing, but you can find this on our website if you really want to dig in. So you can see step one, it's drafted, it's read across the desk in first reading. The committee chair sends it to subcommittee. And so here are the options that it could do at a subcommittee. It could not get a hearing, it could be tabled, or it could be sent to full committee. If they have a subcommittee, which is a smaller sort of topical group of legislators, then they send it to the full committee. Full committee votes on it, and then it moves to the floor. And once it is put on the floor, they can make amendments anywhere throughout that process. And once it's put on the floor, it'll get debated in second reading. That is where everyone can do debates on the floor. They can continue to make amendments on the floor. And then you do third reading, which most of the time is just very like, all right, we did second reading yesterday, we're going to give it third reading now. Cool, we still like this bill. It's very rare that third reading actually does anything. Occasionally you can waive the rules and be like, we're going to waive the rule and do third reading and do amendments on third reading, but that's kind of rare that they do that. Generally, it'll be they send it straight over. And so then, if it originates in the House, then it goes over to the Senate or vice versa. So it goes through the same process. It's read 2 times. It goes through subcommittee, or it goes through subcommittee, full committee. It's read 2 times. And then bottom half of the graphic, if they make amendments to it, it goes back to the House. I like this little guy. He's funny. The House can either concur with the Senate amendments or they can refuse to concur. If they concur, it'll just go to the governor. And if they say, hey, we hate your amendments, we like our version better, then they go to conference committee, which can drag out. Sometimes conference committee, we've seen them last for like an entire year, sitting in conference committee because they just don't want to hold meetings on it. They can't come to an agreement on it. But it depends on the bill, and sometimes conference committee goes pretty smoothly. But eventually, if they ever decide to write a conference report, both chambers go, cool, that's a great conference report. Or if they hate it, then they've got some other problems going on. But then it goes to the governor, it becomes signed, and it becomes law. If the governor vetoes it, there's a 2/3 veto override in both chambers. Or if it's in the budget, they can do a line item. The governor has the power to do a line item veto where he just can say, like, I don't like this specific appropriation. I'm going to cross that out, and I'm going to cross that out, and I'm going to cross that out. And then again, they can override it with 2/3. So that's a lot, but I hope the pictures make a little more sense. So then there's the budget, which is, even though session's on a 2-year term, the budget is annual. It runs on the fiscal year. So you start in July with the new fiscal year. It goes through August and September. A lot of behind the scenes conversations are having. They're getting budget requests from different state agencies. And then the governor holds budget hearings and prepares his executive budget. And in January, the governor releases his executive budget, which is his recommendations for what legislators should put in the budget. They do not have to listen to him, but again, he has that line item veto power, so they kind of want to put some of his stuff in there. And then immediately when session kicks off, they start doing budget requests and budget hearings in the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee. So there's a lot of those. If you look at the legislative calendar right now, there's a lot of those going on where, the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs will go and say, hey, here's what we used the money for last year, and we need new money to do X thing, or we need that same amount of money, or whatever. There was a pretty funny budget hearing last week where the DMV director got up and he gave this loud presentation about I'm using programs for the DMV that are older than my programmers, that are older than all these employees. We haven't updated our records since 2000. He was going and he was yelling into the mic. It was pretty funny. But anyways, so that's kind of the way budget requests work. And then both chambers will do their own version of the budget and then end up reconciling those in conference committee. Earmarks are requests from specific legislators. So if there's hey, the city of Simpsonville needs a community center built. The Simpsonville City Council sent it to us and said, hey, we need this much money for it. Then the legislator from Simpsonville can take that to the committee and be like, hey, this is the budget request that we have. I want to put this in the bill. And so a lot of times you'll see a lot of earmarks in the bill for all these different projects. A lot of it goes to nonprofits. A lot of it goes to sort of municipal city projects. And there is a website on the treasurer's website where you can see all the different earmarks and kind of what they're going for. So I always think that's kind of fun. Okay, so that's the budget. Any questions so far on legislative session, budget, anything? So then briefly wanted to hit you all with this graphic as well about education governance, which I'm sure all of you are aware of, but in case you weren't, it's a hot mess because there are a lot of different stakeholders involved. So we have the State Department of Education led by the superintendent, but we also have the State Board of Education that does different things, and the superintendent sort of answers to the state board, and she's a member of the state board. And then there's a school district's board of trustees that do the more local level stuff, but they also have to answer to the state board. And then the education oversight committee is kind of just an independent group to check and make sure that things are actually working well. And so they kind of provide accountability. That's sort of a unique feature in South Carolina's education system is the education oversight committee. They have very cool and informative meetings that do live streams. So if you're ever really interested, they always end up having a lot of really interesting research reports that get presented. And then the General Assembly obviously is very involved in education. They set all the appropriations and how property taxes fund education. And they also can change district lines at the county legislative delegation level. So Education funding in South Carolina has recently changed. So this is before 2022. You would have all of these different sources for how education funding came together and like kind of piecemealed together over years and years. So you can see like there's a piece in 1977 and a piece in 84 and a piece in 2000. And so it's like all these different um this complicated formula to figure out how education was funding. Um and it did not work very well. So in 2022, the legislature passed a huge thing that consolidated a lot of those existing funding sources into state aid for classrooms. And so they did it based on the number of students, and they brought in like a student calculation formula based on different factors about the students in a particular school district, whether it's pupils in poverty or students with disabilities or that kind of thing. So weighting funding a little bit more. And so this was huge, and it has so far been successful, and it has made a lot more flexibility and ease of understanding of how in the world the education funding works in the state. So this is from 2022-23, but it's kind of stayed similar in the years since then, the way that school district funding is. So you can see about half of the school district funding is local, half-ish is state, and then you have a little bit of federal funding, but not very much. Charter school districts are mostly state funded. They have a little bit of local and a little bit of federal, but not really. Those are mostly state funded. And these kind of vary based on the different school districts. So if you have a school district like Allendale, where you don't have as much local revenue, the state will kick in more funding. So this is kind of just the average, the way that the pie breaks down. And I commend to you the education funding dashboard from the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office. It is very cool how you can go through and see on a county by county level. It's very interactive. You can compare different school districts. You can do little charts, and you can see exactly the average teacher salary. It's really a great resource. Because it is so complicated, they don't update it like super immediately. So they don't have 2023, 24 yet. But it is a very cool resource if you just want to understand how in the world things are working. So that is one of the governor's big priorities the last couple of years has been to raise starting teacher salary statewide to $50,000 and get us up there on par with what the rest of the Southeast is doing. Because for a long time we have lagged very behind what our neighboring states are paying teachers. So first, talking about an issue near and dear to my heart are all the school choice bills moving through the legislature right now. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Education Scholarship Trust Fund program that was in place for this last school year. It was passed into law in 2023. Palmetto Promise worked since like probably 10 or 11 years ago to get this legislation passed. It's something that Ellen Weaver, now the superintendent of education, has been very passionate about. And it allows families, you can kind of see on the right with that graphic how it works. So if families are deemed eligible, they can be put into a little online portal where basically they can pick an education service provider and direct their funds from the online wallet to the education service provider of their choice, whether it is a private school, but you can also use it for other educational expenses like transportation, like disability services. I know there's one mom I talked to who's using it for vision therapy. You can use it for school supplies purchases. So there's a lot of flexibility in what you can use it for. And so that program, the first year of it was this past school year. So it started in August, and we knew there was a legal challenge to it, and the court was requested to put a pause on the program until the legal challenge was figured out. But the court said, no, you're good. You can just continue rolling forward with the program, sign kids up for it. So kids enroll in the program, they receive their scholarship money, they start in their new schools, and then weeks into the school year, at the beginning of September, the Supreme Court released a pretty shocking opinion that they cannot use the funds in their education savings account for a school tuition anymore. They can't use it for private school tuition. And that it's kind of a complicated legal thing, but it's based on language in the state constitution over what is a direct benefit to private schools and what is an indirect benefit. So the argument from the attorneys in favor of this program was that by putting it into an account and letting parents have lots of options, that's an indirect benefit to private schools because it's not being, wired from the state treasury straight to the private school. There's kind of that intermediary, and the parents ultimately decide what to do with it. Um, the 3 members of the Supreme Court did not agree with that, and they said it still is just benefiting private schools and therefore not allowed under the state constitution. That's a whole nother issue because that part of the state constitution was put in there in 1896 as a very anti-Catholic and anti-Jewish sentiment. And so it was put in there by a guy who really, really hated Catholics and didn't want any state money to go to Catholic schools. And so when you hear people defending, that's what the state constitution says, you can remind them about how that got in there in the first place. Um, so the recipients receiving the Education Scholarship Trust Fund, a majority were racial minorities. As you can see, there was a large percentage of students. This is by ratio of county population of school-age children. So you can kind of see where the darkest is where the most applications were from. So you can see Richland and Sumter, like this area here in the Midlands, and then kind of along the corridor of shame as well, are where you had the most applications. This year for 2024-25 was students within 200% of the federal poverty line. And so since the court decision came down, we discovered there's about 1,000 students using it for private school, about 200 schools receiving the funds. And so what Palmetto Promise has ended up doing was not part of our plan, but it kind of ended up as somebody needs to step in and fulfill this role, is fundraising to help these kids be able to stay in their schools the rest of the school year. So this is a graphic that our team put together just this week about what you should know about the bill that the Senate passed. So instead of taking the funds from the state treasury and the general funds, they source the funds from the education lottery dollars. And the reason they do that is because there's previous litigation that says that the education lottery dollars are not public funds in the same way. So you can use your education lottery scholarship, your Palmetto Fellows, your Life Scholarship. You can take that and go to Clemson or USC, private public institutions, but you can also take it and use it at Bob Jones or CSU or Anderson, private institutions. And so there was a whole debate back in the day over whether or not that was a permissible use of the state funds from the lottery. But ultimately it was decided, yes, that's a way we can use the lottery funds. And so the way that this bill is trying to source the funds for the ESA program is from that state lottery fund. It also removes a prior public school attendance requirement. So kids who are in the scholarship program this year were in public school last year. That is removed. The public school attendees are still prioritized in it. It increases the value of the scholarships. It increases the income ceiling. It also removes, there was some controversy about the previous bill having a wellness check in it for students who were using the ESA money for online education. And that was something that was put in there because there was a senator who does a lot of work on child abuse legislation and was very worried about the potential for child abuse issues. But ultimately that ended up getting removed, which I think is a good thing because it creates a lot of hassle for those parents who are using it for online education. So that kind of leads into our next topic about open enrollment, which is public school choice. So the idea of transferring between public school districts or even between different residential zones within a school district. So I'm from Greenville County, where we have the special permission where you can attend a school outside your specific zone if you would like to. So my family is zoned for Blue Ridge High School, but my brothers are at the Fine Arts Center at Wade Hampton High School, so they wanted to go to school at Wade Hampton, and my mother teaches at Wade Hampton, so they wanted to have everyone at the same school. So my brothers received special permission from the school district to be able to go to a school outside their zoned area. Greenville County is one of the school districts that allows that, but a lot of school districts do not. And so what this bill H3199 would do would be requiring school districts to have a policy in place for transferring between different public schools within the district. Um, and then there's sort of the conversation of interdistrict versus intra-district. Interdistrict would be, I always get these mixed up. Interdistrict is from one district to another district. Intra-district is within the school district, but to a different school than the one you're zoned for. There's arguments for both to be included in the open enrollment bill. But it's crazy because this point here about address sharing, South Carolina is one of 25 states that criminally prosecute address sharing. And there's been cases where, the parents of a child are divorced and don't live together. They live in different school districts. Mom wants to enroll the daughter who stays with dad on the weekends in dad's school district because it's a better school. And mom ends up being criminally prosecuted because she was lying about where her daughter lived. When it's like, no, that's still her parent. That's still like, it's crazy. And so mom got criminally charged. It was a huge ordeal. So this bill kind of looks to change a lot of those issues. So any questions on that? Okay. To some more specific to y'all, within Callan's, school board live streaming has been a big hot topic. And one of our summer fellows, bless her, this past year went through the manuals and websites of all of South Carolina school districts to figure out who live streams their meetings, who doesn't live stream their meetings, and also do their board rules have a requirement that their meetings are live streamed. So what you can see is that the dark blue are the ones that live stream, and they have a policy in their, school board rules that they have to live stream. The light blue are people who do live stream, but it's not within their board rules that they live stream. So at any point, they could just decide to not live stream a meeting, and there's no consequences for that. And so then the light orange, kind of yellowish, they don't live stream and they don't have any policy requiring live streaming. And I think the worst ones are these dark orange, where it is in their board manual that they have to live stream their meetings and they do not, which is just crazy to me. The reason these ones in Barnwell are stripey is because those were in the process of merging school districts when this report came out. So we didn't want it to be confusing, but those were their policies prior to merging. We'll talk about school district merging in a little bit. So there was a bill that died at the very end of session. It just kind of ran out of time before sine die. That deadline, which is really like 5 p.m. on this day, you have to do it. And so the bill did not get quite across the finish line, but we're hopeful that this year something will get across the finish line to create a statutory requirement for school districts to live stream, so they can't, oh, we have a really controversial meeting coming up, we're going to choose to not live stream it. That is just unacceptable. And so that is something that we very much have been in support of. Other school board related bills. Senator Hembry, who's the chair of the Senate Education Committee, he has a bill filed that I think is pretty interesting about adopting a school board code of ethics. I think it's requiring school boards to adopt the code. I don't think it's like establishing the ethics code statewide, but it's requiring them to adopt a code of ethics. And then there's one filed in the House, which I think is kind of a wild bill, of saying that school board members can receive the state health plan just as if they were teachers or full-time employees of the school district. I think there's a lot of issues with that bill, primarily being that, number one, school board is a part-time and a public service job. And then number two, you don't want people running for open school board seats just to get the really good state health insurance. Oh man, I have some surgeries coming up, let me run for school board so I can quick get the health plan. State legislators do not receive the state health plan. And so I think probably it should be the same for school board members. And then H 3759 has been filed in the House by some members of the Freedom Caucus, and it is having school board elections be partisan. So one thing that Palmetto Promise has worked on for the last couple years is school district consolidation, because in 1940, South Carolina had 1,742 school districts. Like, it was basically every neighborhood's its own school district. Isn't that crazy? And so over the course of, the last century, there's been an effort to consolidate school districts, so you're not having to have, school district HR and, the superintendent's salary and all of these different things that you're paying for overhead, the school district buildings, school district facilities that you're paying for every single school district. And so what we've been talking about, we released this report in 2018, Stronger Together, that looked at school district, the number of students in each district to see what districts were small and what districts were shrinking and what districts were both small and shrinking. And so those ones that are small and shrinking are the ones that we've argued should be consolidated. So as you can see, some of the districts that are on this list, on this graphic here, are no longer school districts because they've been consolidated. But these ones here are the ones that we kind of have been targeting. So that's something that Superintendent Spearman really prioritized in her administration. And I know Ellen Weaver's been working on that as well. So this is a map from 2021 with sort of an update on that previous 2018 report. And then I have some bullets here. So in 2021, we saw Hampton's school districts down here, these two consolidate. In 2021, we saw Florence merge these two districts. In 2021, we saw the Bamberg districts merge. Clarendon consolidated 1 and 3 together, but then there was 2 still in the middle for a bit. In 2023, the Barnwell districts merged. That went into effect just this past July, when those 3 districts merged. And then this April, actually, in Greenwood, there's consolidation of the Greenwood school districts on the ballot, which I think will be really interesting to see how that one turns out. Because I'm like, dude, why does Greenwood have that many school districts? So, and down the road, it's, looking at what other school districts could continue to be consolidated to cut costs and, ultimately deliver better services for families and students. So, maybe some of these Spartanburg districts up here, there's lots of controversy about the Richland districts or the Lexington districts, getting some more of these Florence districts consolidated. So those are kind of things that are all on the table going forward. But I'll be very curious to see how the Greenwood consolidation works. And there's a bill in the State House this year about the Clarendon districts, and further like laying out how the consolidated Clarendon, I think now it's maybe one Clarendon district. I don't fully remember, but about how their school board elections should be set for Clarendon County. So those are kind of some things happening on that front. So one topic that we think will gain a decent bit of traction is this bill from the House Education Chair Shannon Erickson. It was filed last year and passed the House last year and got stalled in the Senate, but she is very fired up about getting it passed this year, because it's just these crazy regulations on teacher licenses, that under current law, if you leave your job before your school year long contract ends, it is no exceptions. You lose your license for a year, even if you're moving to a different area, you have a family emergency, you have a health crisis, your spouse gets a new job. And so in 2023, I think the stat is from, we had 166 teachers lose their teaching certificate for a whole year because they broke their contract just because the spouse had to move or because a relative experienced a health crisis. And so there's zero flexibility within that policy existing. So the Educator Assistance Act would create some more flexibility. It would give the State Board of Education more discretion in those teacher licensure suspensions. And, if there are different reasons that they could create exceptions for teachers who, oh no, my husband got a job over in Aiken and now I can't, like, what am I gonna do? So that's one that I think will be high priority this year. Another one that's been big on the governor's agenda is school safety. On the right is a quote from his State of the State speech. And so they've been running this last year a state-funded school resource officer program where it's a grant program. So the district has to apply for the funding to fund the salaries of an SRO in every school. It's not at this point fully funded for every single school to have an SRO. So that's one thing that the governor's really been calling for is continued funding of that program to make sure that there is a school resource officer every single day at every single school. And this is kind of my catch-all, more hot topics here for you. So I'm sure everyone is aware of the cell phone ban regulation. Senator Hembry, the Senate Education Chair, has a bill that would codify that into permanent law. Um, but his is specifically in the classroom during times of instruction. The state regulation is, during instructional time, like bell to bell. His is specifically in the classroom. So I think there will be some interesting debate on that one. There's a couple teacher licensing bills that are filed in the Senate. I think almost all of those are Henry bills about counting your previous experience. You were an accountant or you were an economist for 20 years, and now you want to go teach high school econ. Maybe we should count your real life work experience toward your getting licensing experience for your teaching license, because why would we not count that? You worked as a real chemist. We're not going to count that toward you becoming a high school chemistry teacher. That's crazy. So making sure that teachers are more people who are changing career into teaching late in life are more easily able to do that. On a personal note, my mom has a coworker. I mentioned she teaches at Wade Hampton in Greenville. She has a coworker who was an attorney for like 30 years, and he's decided, he did all his things, he made all his money, and now he's decided kind of in his 60s that he wants to be a teacher. And so he's gone through the licensing program, and had to get all these teaching hours and go through all these classes to get certified as a teacher. And so now he's teaching government and econ after his, 30 years as an attorney. And mom says that the kids just love having someone with that kind of perspective who can bring that into the classroom. And, he's coaching their mock trial team now. So there's a lot of benefits that people trained outside, colleges of education who have that real world experience can bring to the classroom. And I think there's a lot of people who are, they've done their career and now they're kind of looking to have something a little more calm, a little more regular hours, have a summer break, and want to give back to the community. And so I think those bills are very worthy. Um, S-169 is kind of tied in with the school choice bill that would take funding from the education lottery, and then increasing the number of hours per year for PE in middle school, just trying to encourage more activity and more. I think the wording in the bill is like unstructured outdoor playtime. So that's a big priority from Patrick Had. And then the teacher salary that Bryce mentioned earlier, the governor has been really pushing. He said for years, his whole term, that by 2050, we want to have the salary be 50,000 for a starting teacher. 8 years ago, it was 30,000, which is crazy to think about. And so every single year, the General Assembly has been upping that teacher salary so that we can be competitive with other states, because the states around us are paying teachers much, much more. So if you live in Rock Hill, you're much more likely to go teach in Charlotte than to teach in Rock Hill because you're going to get paid more. So making sure that teacher salary is competitive with our neighbors and adjusted for the cost of living with all the inflation going on is very important. Yeah, Pamela, I think that you're right. That's what my mom has seen, again, anecdotally, but she's talked about how their school is enforcing it like bell to bell. You cannot have it. You can't have your phone at lunchtime. And it has just totally changed the school culture, is what she said. She's like, kids are sitting in class after, we're done with discussion and they're talking to each other. And she had one student come and tell her, she's like, I'm talking to people that are like friends of mine that I haven't talked to in years. Like we haven't really had a conversation and caught up. And so like the interactions that you're able to have with other students, they're bringing in Lego sets and chess games and playing games at lunch. Mom has said it's totally just like from last semester to this semester, the change in school culture has been really
Right.
dramatic, and I think you'll hear that story from a lot of teachers in your districts as well. Okay, yeah, here's my little plug. Palmetto Promise, we put out a whole legislative agenda every year. It's called the Palmetto Freedom Agenda. I have a little brochure here, but if you go to the website, there's an online brochure where we have an individual web page for every single one of the policies in here, that has all of the resources that we've published on the topic. A lot of them will have links to bills on the topics, and then a video that Oren did explaining the different issues. So if you are the type of person that doesn't like reading, you can just have Oren explain it to you, which I think is kind of fun. So yeah, would definitely recommend that you guys check that out. It's palmettofreedomagenda.org, or if you go to our website, it's right in the middle on the front page.